Today's video will be the biggest LEGO City update of the entire year. I'm building 4 new modules for the harbor, finally connecting it with the rock face we've built last video. I'm starting off with a 4-hour speed build I recorded during a live stream over on my German channel. Therefore, you can also see my phone live streaming the entire thing right there. So far, what I've built is basically just an extension of what I've done with the first 2 modules. This is a modification I added. I've added those olive green leaves along the light bluish gray brick wall, making it a bit more interesting and adding a bit of contrast. For the next module, I don't think I'll have to tell you how I'm exactly building these things. It's basically the same layer of bricks and then plates on top. In my case, I'm using black as a foundation, and then for the watercolor, covering it up with trans light blue tiles. What I'm building right here will be the last straight section of the harbor, because I've also talked about this during previous updates. My main goal in my LEGO City is to get rid of all the straight lines going along the studs of the LEGO base plates. And therefore, I'll now add an angle as soon as we finish this module right here. What you can see right now, what looks a bit like an earthquake, is me adjusting the height of the harbor, because I've mounted the wood plate on which the harbor is built in a way that I can adapt the height in order to perfectly reach the upper platform which connects the harbor with the rest of the city. For the next module, I've already prepared the base layer, since it's always the same and I don't think this is too interesting at some point. What I've mentioned just a second ago is that I wanted to get rid of all the straight lines, and this is my first attempt on doing so with the harbor module. I've used cut plates and now connected these 2 parts via a hinge below the dock, so you can't see it obviously. Then worked on a few more issues I had, for example this gap right there. I've used brick modifieds with added slopes in order to minimize the gaps that were remaining. Although this didn't perfectly fill up the gap, I think it's good enough, and as soon, you'll see it in just a second, as it's built in, you don't even notice the gap. And this was the only solution because of the so-called cut plate I added to this section. I had a second gap along the back of the dock, and now I modified the building technique, once again using brick modifieds and slopes. And now I've developed this system that looks sort of like a zipper if you want. As I've mentioned, always used a brick modified with a added 1x1 slope, and on the opposite side I've then used a normal brick. Having developed that technique, I of course had to work it into the brickwork, otherwise it would have been a bit too noticeable, and having that completed, I was now facing a different problem. Okay, so I've just started connecting the lower module with the upper one via another rock face. I of course gotta extend the entire thing up to this plate right here. I have one small problem remaining though, this gap right here, and my plan is now to fill up the entire thing via a sideways built-in slope. And I think that should then fill up the gap. I'd say we continue building. I of course didn't disassemble the entire upper module, but simply tried to extend the gap between the base plate and the plate I've built the rest of the module on, and then tried to fit the brick modifieds and the normal bricks in between the gap, connected everything back together. Then right there I also added my zipper element I developed earlier, and as you also can see right now, it looks a lot better if I've added the rest of the brickwork and I'm not just using normal smooth bricks. Right there is the 1x3 slope I've used to fill up this gap that was remaining behind the brick wall, and with that being done, I could then continue modeling the rock face up towards the upper modules, where the rock face then continues onto the upper platform of the LEGO City. I've also mixed up the building techniques using the normal slope building technique I'm also using in the back of my city for the mountain. And then I've also used brick modifieds in order to turn the studs by 90 degrees and thus have at least partly used the building technique I've used for the rest of the rock face in order to sort of blend the 2 things together. I then had a few gaps remaining that were too straight and I needed to get rid of. So I've partly remodeled that transition in between the 2 different modules, then continued working on the fence. However, I gotta say that right now I'm not quite satisfied at this point with the fence. I'll comment on that at the end of the video once again. Of course, adding more details for the harbor itself, because at the moment it's still too gray and way too boring. I'm also hoping that that will fix itself as soon as I'm adding more and more ships to the harbor. I've also tried to add logs coming out of the harbor, because that's what you sometimes find in harbors for ships to anchor or in order to keep ships away from crashing into the concrete dock. And therefore I've decided that would be a nice addition to the entire thing. And it also, once again, adds more details. I think with all the progress we've made so far in this video, it's time to take a look at the entire thing live in the city. What I've just done is add all these chains to the harbor. My idea was that maybe ships might anchor in the harbor and then connect to these woodlocks, for example, and then connect with these chains. Sometimes I've simply laid them onto the dock simply for decoration purposes, but these are all those small details that actually really matter. For this corner with the rock face right here, I've of course now ended the dock, which also means the harbor is finished. I might even add a different harbor at some point down somewhere there as soon as we have space to extend the thing, of course. But for now, what I want to do is come out with the rocks, and then this was an idea over from my German viewers on the German channel, maybe add a lighthouse right here. And I think it might fit. On the other hand, we of course have the normal city right at the end of the rock face up on this upper section of the city, which might be a little bit too close. I'm not quite sure at this point, but a lighthouse would be an idea for this corner. Definitely let me know your thoughts for this down in the comments. A few minutes ago, I also briefly mentioned that I might actually want to change these fences up here. And now one idea I had was to maybe use once again these chain elements. That would maybe smoothen out the entire thing, because that's probably the main thing that bothers me at the moment. It all looks a bit rough with all those sharp corners in there. And so adding chains might be a good idea to get rid of all these sharp edges and corners. On the other hand, I definitely need black as a contrast color, because behind that we once again have dark bluish gray, which wouldn't fit the chains. So adding chains in black might be the solution, although I'm not sure about that at the moment. One thing that's honestly a bit annoying are all these straight gaps I have in between the modules right there, for example, or back there. I think you get the point. But now in hindsight, I would definitely simply cover everything up with more vegetation. But I didn't think about that while building, but simply think about that. Right here, for example, having this exact thing covering the gap would be the perfect solution for that. So that was a bit annoying realizing that just now. Taking a few steps back from the Lego City, it of course makes a giant difference to have all that wood finally covered that was still empty at the beginning of this update right here. I mean, we've covered an entire meter of wood. And also if you take a look at the rest of the city, not having this empty corner remaining, I'm so pleased with the result. So that completes the progress I've made down here at the harbor. Next video, I think I'll continue on the upper platform of the city, maybe even adding the tram itself. 1 or 2 buildings, we'll see about that. And then of course I'm still preparing the next location, the future Lego Museum, in order to be able to move the Lego City within the next year. So with that being said, that's it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you again in the next one.